Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, August 18th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 15 days, 2 weeks and 1 day. The game against Michigan in 99 days. We are under 100 days, even to the Michigan game. College football really almost getting here. Someone who already almost got here and then did get here is Kevin Noon of BuckeyeHuddle.com. He joins me right now. We are at the Woody. We just got a chance to finish talking to the Ohio State defensive line and Coach Larry Johnson. A lot of interesting stuff, but I think some of the big overarching things were maybe the most interesting to me, where they talked about focusing on working together as a group and not getting creative, not going, aha, I'm going to do a spin move now, when that's not the plan. Like, stick to the plan, work together as a unit. That, Tony and I talked about this on the episode of Buckeye Weekly that dropped on Thursday. Is that backwards facing, and that was not always the case last year, and we're going to make sure that's the case this year?
I don't know. We've heard that discussion through the years, through different administrations. Play your 1/11th. Stay in the plan. Don't go out and play hero ball. You need to go out there and do what is in the plan. And I think we certainly saw some times last year, maybe where somebody pressed and it opened up something. And that's certainly, when we talk about a team that was really good on defense outside of a few mistakes, how many of those mistakes were mistakes of effort and trying to do something that wasn't necessarily part of the plan? So, maybe I'm extrapolating there a little bit, but that's kind of how I process that.
And, the other piece of that conversation that I thought was interesting was that they're going to try to, they're not looking at stats when it's like, oh, this guy led the team in sacks this year. That they're not looking at that. They're looking at the defensive line's sacks as a unit total, not as this guy had this many and this guy had this many. Because the idea is, if one guy is drawing a double team or a triple team and another guy is singled and then he goes and gets a sack, like, who gets the credit for the sack? The guy who's 10 feet away with three guys on him did, maybe play just as much of a role. That all seems to kind of fit in a lot of ways with the everyone has to just do their part and not worry about the individual thing.
Well, just to go back to last year, how many times did Mitch Rossi get credit for a play where he picked up two guys and was able to open the hole that much bigger for the guy to go through? You need to sit there, and that's why I think that there's something to be said about production points and havoc points and things of that nature. That is a better measurement, but at the end of the day, the goal is to get to 15, and that's 15 wins, which is what you would need to go through and run the table all the way through and hoist the gigantic leg lamp of a trophy in Houston.
Yeah, it is in Houston this year. We were just talking about that before practice. Just where might this be headed? And the answer is maybe Houston. We'll see. Defensive line is going to play a big part of that, and one of the pieces that might play a big part of that is how do they stop the run? Because they gave up some big plays through the air last year, but they also, especially end of the Michigan game, gave up a couple long plays on the ground. Obviously, probably don't need to tell Ohio State fans that, but you probably have spent the last 9 months or so trying to block that out of your memory. So there it is.
Thanks, Tom.
It has come rushing back. Well, we gotta rip the Band-Aid off and have an honest conversation. And that may be one of the things that is inspiring a little bit of a philosophical change for the defensive line this year, where last year it was go get the passer, and then if you see them running, like, grab that guy on the way by. This year, it seems like job one is stop the run, and then you worry about the pass.
Well, and I think if we look back at a lot of the successful Ohio State defenses, it was all predicated by stopping the run. And that was always the thing I took out of it, that Ohio State would generally take the big back out of the game, whether it was with Wisconsin or somebody of that nature. And then it was like, okay, now you have to beat us through the air, and you kind of go from there. So I think a return to that in at least somewhat of the framework is a huge step in the right direction toward what we have seen them have success with in the past.
What's so interesting is you mentioned Wisconsin there, and Wisconsin's going to be running a real different offense this year. So now that's maybe not as true for Wisconsin. Iowa's not on the schedule, but Penn State has a first-year starting quarterback, a couple real talented running backs. Michigan has been known to lean on the run game quite a bit. So, that may be a little bit reflective of an overall philosophy, maybe a little bit reflective of what you're expecting the big games to be this year too.
Well, and while Wisconsin may be running a little bit of a different offense, Wisconsin still has Braylon Allen, who is a tremendous running back, and it would be a pretty bad misstep, in my opinion, if Luke Fickell, first-year head coach of Wisconsin, didn't lean on him. But yeah, I think everybody, when they look at Ryan Day's record and there's the 6 losses on there, I mean, those losses have been against teams that Ohio State has been talent equated with, and those are going to be the ones that everybody is going to be most concerned with. We're not talking about Western Kentucky. We're not talking about Youngstown State. We're not talking about Rutgers. We're really not even talking about the season opener of Indiana, if we're being quite honest. It's Notre Dame, it's Wisconsin, it's Penn State, it's Michigan, and those are going to be the games where you're going to be taking those midterms, and ultimately with Michigan being the final exam of the regular season.
And, while they're playing those teams, that's a lot of big games to play. And that's a lot of, it's real easy to not play the defensive line starters in the second half against Rutgers or Youngstown State if you're up by 40 points. If you're playing talent as equated games, you're going to be testing your depth a little bit in those games. And that's been something that has gotten Ohio State fans a little annoyed in the past. Larry Johnson has been, typically a very liberal rotator of his players at defensive end. And he talked about that a little bit on Thursday, where he doesn't want them to wear down over the course of the season. He said, you can't play a guy 70 snaps 15 times a game. You'll break him, basically. But also, I thought it was interesting. Were you around when he was talking about how he decides how many snaps a guy can go during a? No, okay. So the short version is that he looks at practice film, and how many plays can a guy go full speed? They know what full speed looks like. They have those little trackers on, that they wear. So they know what full speed looks like. How many plays can a guy go full speed in practice before he starts to get tired? That's how many plays they're they're kind of projecting the guy to play on Saturday. So if you can go full speed 35 plays in practice, well, then you can play 35 plays in the game. If you can only do that for 10 or 15, well, then you're probably only going to play 10 or 15. But I think they have the depth this year where you're not going to see JT Tuimoloau playing 60 snaps every single game. That's not a realistic expectation. But with the depth that seems like it's coming up behind those guys, Tuimoloau and Sawyer, and got a couple guys in the interior of the defensive line they feel pretty good about. That may not be as much of a drop-off as it has been in the past.
Well, I think the big thing, too, that fans see is an 80% JT Tuimoloau better than 100% John Doe? And that's me not throwing any player under the bus just by using the anonymous name there. And I think there has been a level of frustration with fans at some points where you see some of the most critical plays and you look at the line and you're like, what? That's not the ones right there. What's going on with that? So while I think it is a good strategy to make sure that you have legs under these guys through what could potentially be a 15-game season, let's also not forget the fact that how many games in a given year is Ohio State playing into the fourth quarter? It's only a couple of games. So, I would be very interested to kind of hear some of the philosophical discussions that are going on between Jim Knowles and Larry Johnson and everything else to try and make sure you have your best players out at the right time. Because if you sit there and you look at your film and it's like, okay, well, 35 is his cutoff, and you've already had 32 plays and you're in a knuckle-crunching drive right there, I think you sit there and you need to throw that hard cap out the window.
Yeah, I don't know that he was viewing it as a absolute hard cap. You get yanked off the field no matter what the situation.
Take your helmet away.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going through concussion protocol. I think it's more this is the plan, and as they say, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Well, and no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. I think there's a little bit of that in this as well. But, there is depth there, and one of the depth pieces on the interior of the defensive line is Tywone Malone. He came out of high school, was very interested in Ohio State, ended up going to Ole Miss because he was both a football player and a baseball player, and he wanted to play baseball. And the SEC is generally considered the highest level of baseball there is in the country. Ole Miss has won the national championship when Tywone Malone was down there. That is a very high-level program. Okay, so that's a little bit of an understandable thing. When he decided, it's probably best for my family that I focus on football, that really changed his thinking. He went in the portal, and he said his relationship with Larry Johnson from high school led him right back to Ohio State. And that's, he's someone who you generally don't expect a true freshman defensive tackle, like Caden McDonald. They like Caden McDonald a lot. Big, the big-bodied interior defensive lineman. They really don't get all that often. But he's a true freshman, and sometimes it is going to take a year in the system. Bringing in a veteran who's played a couple of years, been in an SEC strength program for a couple of years, played at the college level for a couple of years. It's a little bit of a different defense, but he said this is kind of the same basic position, 3-tech, that he played in high school. It was a little bit of a different thing down at Ole Miss, but he's familiar with 3-tech. He knows what Larry Johnson's looking for. Being able to add that feels like it's like a cheat code to just be able to kind of skip through a couple years of development and just throw a guy out there and have like quality depth and a guy who can play meaningful snaps right away.
Yeah, being able to sim 2 years is nice with that situation, because you're not bringing in an 18-year-old who doesn't understand the difficulties of being a student athlete, of how to manage your time and everything else. And oh, by the way, somebody who has shed the kid fat and has got more of a man's body at this point, in a position where there's a lot of physicality on the inside of the line. There's not a lot of space to operate. So Tywone Malone is a huge get, and he's somebody that I expect to see a nice amount of playing time out of.
Yeah, and another guy who they have they have not really seen on the field since Tony and I talked about this. First game of the 2020 season, Mitchell Melton, defensive end. He said he's been working both at jack and defensive end. It sounds like he's maybe working his way into the defensive end rotation, where he might be one of the 5 or so guys who's getting meaningful snaps at the defensive end spot. Before we let you go, we always end up plugging Buckeye Huddle at the end of these shows. You should know about Buckeye Huddle by now. You might not know about Saturday Glory. SaturdayGlory.com is a new website launched by your friends at Buckeye Huddle with some really, really talented young writers and taking a little bit more of a national focus on college football. But you will see some plenty of familiar names and faces. Our buddy Tyler Shoemaker is going to be doing a podcast there. But we have a lot of really talented folks there. So go ahead and check out SaturdayGlory.com, and there's going to be a YouTube channel there that you can subscribe to. Make sure you go ahead and do that, because I can promise you're going to enjoy some of the content that gets churned out there. Betting, a lot of folks interested in dabbling in sports wagering, I'm going to guess, now that it is legal in the state of Ohio this fall. Going to have some really interesting content there, as well as some nationally focused stuff. I was just looking, the top headline right now is about Lane Kiffin, which, boy, if you want me to, Lane Kiffin, always a really entertaining follow on Twitter, and always a really entertaining
must-watch guy.
Yes, always much-watched content from Lane Kiffin. So you can find that at SaturdayGlory.com as well. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday.